Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's ITA Clean Sport Education webinar as the expert supplements. My name is Armando Urban, member of the educational team at the International Testing Agency. Before I go any further, I want to make sure that everyone is aware of the simultaneous interpretation options available for you today. On your Zoom menu, you should see a button called Interpretation. This session is delivered in English with simultaneous interpretation available in Arabic, French, Russian, and Spanish. Please know that all languages are being recorded. Additionally, you have the option to use automated translated captions. To access this, please select a supported language from the captions box in your Zoom menu. And be aware that these captions are translations of the original English audio, and in the event of any discrepancies, the meaning and spirit of the original English version will prevail. Now that we are all set, let's get started. First off, I'm delighted to introduce this month's topic as the expert supplements, alongside our guest panelist, Jeni Pearce, a leading sports dietitian and nutritionist. Jeni is a member of the New Zealand Order of Merit for her contributions to sports nutrition. She is a New Zealand registered dietitian and holds an IOC diploma in sports nutrition. She has an extensive experience supporting elite athletes and teams globally, including roles with High Performance Sport New Zealand and English Institute of Sport. She has also supported athletes at numerous Olympic and Paralympic Games, and Jeni is widely recognized for her leadership in sports nutrition education, risk management programs, and her governance roles in New Zealand. Jeni, it's such a pleasure to have you with us today. We're really looking forward to hearing your insights and all your experience that you bring to this session. Before we start the discussion, I would like to invite you to say a few words to everyone who is joining us today.
Kia ora, and good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. It's a real pleasure to be sharing this session with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeni, for your kind words. We're really excited to have you with us. So let's dive into today's topic and get started with the discussion. To get the most out of today's webinar, we are asking your opinion and testing your knowledge through polls, answering the questions that you submitted when you registered, and taking also additional questions live at the end of the session. You can send them at any time using the Q&A button in your Zoom menu, and the earlier you send them, the better. So let's start. Research indicates that the prevalence of supplement use among athletes can range from 40% to 100% depending on the sport and the level of competition. However, the use of supplement comes with risk, as we all know, including the potential for an inadvertent anti-doping rule violation. Unlike medications, which are rigorously regulated, supplements are not held to the same standards and cannot be checked in the same manner. So before we continue, let's take a moment to remind you about a very important document that you must be familiar with. And yes, you're right, this is the prohibited list. The What Prohibited list tells us what substances and methods are prohibited in sport and when. It's important to know that it's updated at least once a year, and the new list comes into effect on the 1st of January every year. Now, substances and methods on the list can be prohibited at all times, prohibited only in competition, or prohibited only in particular sports. And importantly, substances included on the prohibited list can be found in a range of products, including medications, both prescription and over-the-counter, recreational drugs also, and relevant to today's topic, supplements. Importantly for today's session, you must know that anti-doping is based on the principle of strict liability. This means an athlete is solely responsible for everything they use and that is found in their body, regardless of whether there is an intention to cheat or not, or if the athlete is at fault. It is never an excuse for an athlete to say, I didn't know there was a prohibited substance in my supplement. If supplement use results in a positive test, you, as an athlete, will face the consequences. So, why are supplements a risk for athletes? Well, they are a risk because the supplement industry is not well regulated, and due to this lack of regulation, supplements can contain prohibited substances as their main ingredients. They can also become contaminated during the manufacturing process or through the supply chain of ingredients. They could be mislabeled, meaning that contents don't match what is stated on the label. Contamination and mislabeling also can lead to inadvertent ingestion of prohibited substances. And finally, supplements can also pose a health risk with some testing showing the presence of heavy metals and pesticides. And it's important to remember that no supplement is 100% risk-free for an athlete. And this is really important. There must always be an expert-informed reason for an athlete to use them. Now, let's take a look at some supplements examples together. You can see on your screen a supplement called Alpha Cuts, which claims to support weight loss, provide clean energy, and act as a metabolic amplifier. We have blown up the ingredients label of this product, and here I'm going to ask you something. Can you spot the prohibited ingredient on this supplement label? As you can see in the poll, the options that you can choose from are, is it carnitine, is it hygienamine, or is it paradoxine? No pressure, just pick the answer that you think it's right. And while you are submitting your answers, I'll take a moment to say hello to those of you who are joining us live. So it's fantastic to have you with us today. Welcome to those joining us from Malaysia fencing. Thank you. Great to have you with us. Canoe and kayak, hello. Hello from Lebanon. Thanks for joining us as well. Ukraine, thank you so much for joining us. Shout out to you guys. Portugal, Mexico, Nepal, and many, many more. All right, so let's close the poll and share the results with our attendees and take a look at the correct answers. So well done, everyone. It's great to see that many of you spotted the correct prohibited substance. Hygienamine is a beta-2 agonist, which are a group of substances prohibited in sport at all times. If an athlete tests positive for this substance, they will be sanctioned with an anti-doping rule violation. So this poll highlights that supplements cannot be checked in the same way as medications. Carnitine and paradoxine are not listed in global draw. And even if all the ingredients in a supplement can be checked, there's still no guarantee that it's free from prohibited substances because of the risk of contamination or mislabeling. So let's move on and look at another supplement. On your screen, you can see a supplement called Athlete, which is marketed as a pre-workout. We have blown up the ingredients label of this product here. And can you identify the prohibited ingredient on this supplement label? The options you have to choose from are, is it beta-alanine, is it phenylethylamine, or is it tyrosine? Take your time, have a good look at the ingredients, and I guess this is a great practice for you to spot red flags on supplement labels. And I can see that so far the favorite choice is changing a lot. Let's see what the final results show. So let's close the poll and share the results with everyone. All right, so let's take a closer look at the right answer. Phenylethylamine is a stimulant which is prohibited during the in-competition period. Anything prohibited in competition must have left an athlete's system by the start of this period. It is not the time that an athlete must stop using the product. So if an athlete test positive for phenylethylamine, they will face an anti-doping rule violation. And again, this poll highlights that supplements cannot be checked in the same way as medications. Alanine, for example, is not searchable on Global Draw, and a reminder that even if all ingredients in a supplement can be checked, there is still no guarantee that it's free from prohibited substances because of the risk of contamination or mislabeling. So now that we have seen these examples, let's take a look at a tool that can help you make informed decisions. So this next slide shows a decision-making flowchart designed specifically for you, the athletes. The flowchart can help you make informed decisions based on scientific research and, of course, in an expert guidance. If a supplement does not meet these criteria, the advice given by the flowchart is simple: do not consider it. If you decide that the benefits of supplements outweigh the risk, then you should only consider batch-tested supplements, screened by an independent company that tests for substances prohibited in sport. And remember that this does not guarantee that you will not test positive, but minimizes the risk. On your screen, you can see a few independent batch testing companies that we recommend. You can also check with your national anti-doping organization for their recommendation, as there may be country and language specific information that will best suit your needs. And remember again that no supplement is 100% risk-free for an athlete. So again, there must be an expert informed reason for an athlete to use them. As we mentioned earlier, when you registered, you had the opportunity to submit questions on today's topic, and we want to thank everyone who sent them in. We received a lot of questions, so we have grouped them together to cover as many as possible. And just a reminder that our May monthly webinar will focus on nutrition. So you will have another opportunity then to submit more questions on that topic. And now I would like to welcome back Jeni to please join me as we go through some of the questions that you submitted. Jeni, thank you again for being with us today. What about we start with the first question?
Sure, this is a really good question. So how do you do a nutritional assessment for an athlete? So the key things are that you need to get a registered dietitian or a nutritionist or somebody who has worked in the field and has actually trained, because it's actually quite complicated. The three key areas are it must be individualized, and that means it must relate to the athlete. So we need to talk about anthropometry, or what we call body composition, biochemical, which might be blood tests. It might be clinical, which could be any eating issues or food allergies. And then there's the whole area of dietary patterns. So that's just one. The next area is it must be customized. And that's for the sport or the activity that the person is doing. It needs to take into account for the rules, when you can get drinks, when you can come off to get drinks, like in basketball. It also needs to think about the position and then also the levels of training. And thirdly, it needs to be periodized. And by this, we mean the phase in the cycle for the athlete. So are they in the off season, the pre-season? Is it part of recovery, the competition? And also, what environment are they in? So winter or summer? And also, is there any travel involved? So it's quite a complex thing to take all those factors into consideration when you're actually doing an assessment. And a well-done assessment will give the athlete a good understanding of all the factors that they need to consider in nutrition.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jeni. Let's jump to our next question, which is, how are nutritional needs different between males and females?
Great. And there's a lot of interest in currently in special nutrient requirements and energy requirements for females. It's actually undergoing a lot of research. The key nutrients that are different from females are usually iron and calcium. One, because females have smaller bones, and two, because females often have regular losses of iron. Most of the other nutrients are actually calculated based on grams per kg. Now, there are a couple of provisos where this changes, and this is for pregnancy and also for youth, where there is a massive growth phase. So generally, studies are also showing that with for females that they still tend not to consume enough total energy, and particularly carbohydrate. So it's not that there's a difference. There's just a couple of things that actually should be prioritized.
Thank you, Jenny. That was really interesting, especially around the energy demands. And building on that, our next question looks at the bigger picture. In some countries, it can be difficult for an athlete to achieve a diet that meets all their needs. What should they do?
Well, the first thing to do is to try and find a professional that understands what's available in your country. And it's really interesting because food sources are available. They just look different in different countries because we all have foods that are actually related to our own environments. So the key thing is to make sure that the athlete can get sufficient volume first, and then to look at the macronutrients, which are the carbohydrates, the proteins, and the fats, and then look at the micronutrients, which are the vitamins and the minerals. And remember, foods often provide more than one simple nutrient. For example, fruits and vegetables can provide vitamin C and vitamin A or beta carotene. So we don't want to be eating one food for one nutrient. We need to be looking at all the different diets. So get some advice and then look at the different food sources that are available.
Thank you, Jenny. That's excellent advice on actually always seeking professional support and focusing on nutrient-rich whole foods. Now let's turn to our next question. What are your recommendations around supplement use and young athletes?
The key thing here is we want to go get young athletes into good behaviors with their food first. So young athletes need to focus on good meals, regular eating, making sure they eat well during the day and don't miss meals, and particularly for those that are under the age of 18. Greater benefits come from developing really good food behaviors rather than actually relying on supplements. There's also concerns with supplements with smaller young athletes that there could be issues with overdosing, and there can be internutrient reactions where the one nutrient actually blocks the absorption or hinders the absorption of another, and iron and calcium are classic examples there. So the key thing is for young athletes, regular meals, getting sufficient energy and allowing for growth, and learning to eat a wide variety of food.
Thank you, Jenny. Yeah, that's a crucial reminder to prioritize real food and build solid eating habits before considering supplements. So now let's move on to our next question. What is your messaging to athletes and coaches about pre-workouts?
Well, pre-workouts are interesting. And in my view, pre-workouts should be food and fluid. So athletes should arrive hydrated and already pre-fueled. And most of these pre-workouts contain stimulants or creatine or beta-alanine or even caffeine. So you need to read the labels on them very, very carefully and be very aware of the doses. We don't generally recommend these to athletes, and pre-workouts are one of the products that tend to turn up regularly containing banned substances or banned stimulants. So you need to make sure that if somebody is going to use these, they need to make sure that they are at least third-party batch tested.
Completely agree. Simple, I guess, pre-exercise snacks like banana on a toast, a bowl of cereal milk, or a fruit smoothie, I think paired with proper hydration, are the only things that an athlete needs. So,
and I'd also say, don't go to training fasted. Make sure that you've had something to eat and drink before you get there. That's really important.
Absolutely. So with that in mind, let's go over the next question. Should supplements marketed to athletes be avoided?
Well, this is a tricky question. Not always. There are companies out there who are independently testing their supplements for banned substances. And as you've clearly stated, it doesn't mean there's no risk, but this is minimal risk or risk minimization. So you always need to be able to recognize the logos of the companies that actually are testing your products, and make sure you really know what they mean, because some only test a batch where others will test every batch. So they're not all equal. So again, it comes back down to the athlete. And the other thing is that look for the products that support hydration and fueling for events. So things like gels and sports drinks and electrolyte tabs for people who have very high sweat levels. Those are probably the priority ones. But again, making sure that actually you know what you're taking and why you're taking it. Don't read the marketing. Ignore the front of the packet. Get some advice. And, you've got to be really careful because sometimes the dosing instructions are designed for 80-kilogram men, not 50-kilogram athletes.
Thank you, Jenny. Now, let's move to the next one, which is actually quite interesting. Are traditional or herbal supplements safe?
This is a really no. The reason for this is banned substances can be derived from herbal ingredients, and the levels may also be concentrated. So again, if you're considering using a herbal, make sure it's being tested because that's really important. And these are some of the products that may also be found to have a high risk of toxic metals, such as lead and arsenic. They're actually from the soil they're actually growing in some cases. So you need to be very careful with herbals.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jenny. Crucial warning that even herbal ingredients can be around there. Okay, so with that in mind, here's our next question. Who can athletes contact to test their supplements for substances prohibited in sport?
Great, this is a good question. Now you saw the logos before, so you'll know those companies are out there. But you can also go to your national sporting organisation or your international associations because they can also provide you with advice, as can the ITA, let you know if you have any issues there, and also go to the companies directly, make them accountable. All right, and in different countries, such as the UK, US, Australia, and Europe, there are different countries, there are different companies that are actually doing this, and it's expanding. So it's covering more of the globe. But again, be careful. Make sure that you get some really good advice because remember, athletes, you're 100% accountable for anything that goes in your body.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jenny. What about if we go to the next one? How can athletes and their support staff obtain information to assess the risk level of nutritional supplements?
Right, this is where education is absolutely critical. So compositions change all the time from batch to batch. So again, checking with the good sources of information. The Australian Institute of Sport has some excellent information available on their website. Contact a sports dietitian or a sports medicine doctor who has actually got some training in there. Sometimes your local GP doesn't have enough knowledge, or your local doctor in this particular area. And make sure the people that you're talking to have got experience. And just as we've seen, labels can be very hard to understand and may not also list all the ingredients. And it's really hard, as we've just seen with the little quizzes, really hard to recognize sometimes the actual banned substances, even if they are on the label.
I appreciate that, Jenny. Up next, we have, from your experience, how can a national anti-doping organization or others can effectively educate athletes on identifying high-risk supplements, especially those marketed at athletes?
Well, I think a lot of the NADOs do a really good job by providing education. So go to webinars, go to seminars, all right? Make sure there's regular communications. Part of my job is to actually put out alerts and advisories to the sports organizations when we actually identify products that have actually been found to contain contaminated supplements or ingredients. If you can't get to a seminar, try an online course. All right, but basically information changes. So you need to do this regularly. Just because you've done one, it's not ticking a box. You actually need to repeat that and do that regularly, at least annually, because as we've mentioned, the WADA prohibited list changes and there may be some important changes that you need to know. And not just for the athletes, it should be coaches, team managers, sports commercial managers, and even parents. If they can get themselves upskilled and raise awareness, this makes it easier for everyone.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jenny. That was really helpful. The next question is, let's be honest, athletes use supplements. So why don't organizations recommend supplement companies?
Well, the tricky part here is that no supplements can be labeled 100% safe. So again, a lot of sports organizations are very uncomfortable with actually recommending products. So again, remember also that the IOC and WADA don't support any supplements or supplement companies. So the key thing here is you can give good information, but again, it's up to the athlete to make the choices themselves.
Absolutely. And keeping that into perspective, Jenny, our next question is, what recommendations should athletes and their medical team follow when transporting supplements?
Okay, this is really interesting because as we compete around the world, everybody's on the move and athletes do need to take their supplements with them. So please check the custom regulations of the country that you're visiting when you're traveling. Take a list of the supplements and their ingredients and their batch numbers with you. Either put it in your phone or carry it on a piece of paper. Take full containers, all right, so that nothing's been opened. So when you go through customs, if you get stopped, they can actually see that the product hasn't been tampered with. Make sure you take enough for the tour or the time that you are traveling so that you know if your products have been assessed and you know that they're good for you to take. Then if you run out, then you're not trying to find a substitute, because that's where a lot of athletes do get into issues. Split the supplies between your hand luggage and your suitcase, just in case your suitcase goes missing or something happens with your hand luggage and it gets crushed or damaged, and so you don't want to lose all your supplements as well. Please don't take anything in a plastic bag, particularly if it's a white powder. This is not good because there'll be lots of questions asked. And remember to tell customs that these are for your personal use and they will not be left behind in the country, because customs are very particular about those two conditions.
Thank you, Jenny. That's, I would say, essential travel advice for athletes and their support teams on the road. Well, with that in mind, our next question is, what role do antioxidants have on performance and recovery?
Right, that's a big question. And I had to really think really hard about this one, because we could have an hour and a half on antioxidants and how they work in the body all by itself. Antioxidants are a group of compounds that are actually naturally found in our food, and your body actually also does make some antioxidants. So most often we get them from the food that we eat, such as fruits and vegetables. And the major ones that we often think about are vitamin C and vitamin E, which are readily available. What they do is that they're part of the body's defense mechanism due to the stresses and strains of daily life, pollution, exercise. And what they do is they help to reduce the cell damage. Now, we used to think that this inflammation process was a bad thing, but we now know actually it's quite a good thing. So we don't want to go overboard on antioxidants. They need to be taken in measured amounts. The other interesting thing is these antioxidants are also used in the food industry to preserve food. So it protects it from damaging your food and keeps your food fresher for longer. So it's a nice way to think about how it looks after your body as well.
Thank you, Jenny, and absolutely agree. We can spend hours here. But what about we move to the next one? What is the role of magnesium in preventing cramps, and can you overdose?
What's interesting is that it's very difficult to overdose through food. And that's why we should always look for food sources first. Magnesium is currently very popular, and the evidence for cramps is very mixed. It comes down to a lot of sweat rates and the type of exercise that you do, and it's only one factor. Honestly, if we could cure cramps, somebody will get a Nobel Prize. It is that tricky to actually deal with. So we can get plenty of magnesium in our diets through having legumes, having soy products, tofu, seeds, nuts, whole grains, fruits, lots of dark green leafy veggies, and the favorite one is actually some dark chocolate. So don't be afraid to have a little bit of dark chocolate with your magnesium. But you have to be careful with supplements, because it's much easier to overdose, and particularly if you're taking multiple supplements, you can very easily get above the upper safe limits.
Thank you, Jenny. Now let's move to another one that actually many athletes asked. What does creatine do, and can this be obtained from a food source?
This is probably one of the most well-researched supplements after caffeine. All right, so there's a lot of really good data out there. Creatine is available in food. It's part of meat, it's part of muscle, but the volumes that you would have to consume would be impractical. It would be kilos of meat to get the doses that we currently take in a supplement. What it does is it works to produce energy during high intensity and repeated sprints or repeated intense energy demands. So it actually helps you to do things like stop and go or sprinting or weightlifting or in the gym. So it has a number of benefits, and it's a very much a personal choice on whether people would like to take it. But there is some excellent research out there now about the benefits of creatine in sport.
Thanks, Jenny. Up next, we will look at what vitamin helps absorb calcium and what are its food sources.
Great. Calcium is a very important mineral for our bones, and also importantly for muscle contraction. The key thing with calcium is that it's vitamin D that actually helps with calcium absorption. So if you live in a country where there's poor sunlight, or if you're in an indoor sport and you don't get outside very much, then it's probably a good idea to check that you are getting enough calcium. Interestingly, minerals like magnesium and iron interfere with calcium absorption. So you don't want to be taking your iron supplement at the same time as you take your calcium supplement, because you'll reduce the absorption of both. Good sources of calcium include dairy, legumes, dried beans, nuts and seeds, particularly almonds and cashews, and also salmon, where you eat the bones, and sardines, where you also eat the bones. So those are really good food sources. Vitamin D is very difficult to get from dietary sources because there aren't many foods that it's found in naturally. Maybe egg yolks is probably the big one, and we get most of it from sunlight. So getting outside and making sure that you look after your sunlight is actually quite important.
Thanks, Jenny. For our final question in this section, let's turn to what do studies say about beta-alanine and pea protein?
Okay, so beta-alanine is a buffer, and it's if you want to know more about how this works, because it's not useful in all sports and for all individuals. So it's one of those ones where you do need to go and get some good dietary advice. So the AIS, Australian Institute of Sport, has a very good infographic on beta-alanine that you can download and have a read for free. But please make sure you go and check that out with a sports dietitian, a sports doctor, or a physiologist, because this is one that if you get the doses wrong, it can be very, very uncomfortable. And also, I wanted to highlight that not all supplements benefit all athletes, or it should be taken in all sports and activities. And we definitely wouldn't recommend beta-alanine for youth or for pregnant mums. Pea protein is really interesting. There's been a real increase with the vegetarian movement and people wanting to be more sustainable with using pea protein. Just remember, it's a good source of protein, but you do need a little extra for it to work the same as it does with whey protein. So the other thing is look for qualifications such as the IOC diploma, and if you're in the UK, it's SENR, Sports and Exercise Nutrition Register. In Australia, you have the Sports Dietitians Sports Dietitians Australia group. And then in America, there's the Registered Dietitians Sports Nutrition Group, and the licensed dietitians. So they're all people that can actually provide you good advice when you're looking at using some of these supplements. And I'm sure there are many out there, because I know there's places in Canada and other countries as well. So make sure you Google your dietitians, sports dietitians, and something will pop up for you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jenny, for answering the questions our audience submitted through the registration link. Before we jump into our live Q&A, we'd like to walk you through a few case studies And as we go through them, feel free to share your thoughts in the chat, or if you have a question that comes to your mind, also drop it in the Q&A box. And we'll do our best to get as many questions as we can during the live Q&A. So sorry, we go to the first case scenario. Here we are. So imagine that an athlete is away at camp and has forgotten the protein powder. The roommate offers to share their supplies. So here, what do you do? What questions should you ask? And Jenny, what are your thoughts on this one?
Right, this happens quite a lot often for athletes. So the first thing is don't use it straight away, all right? You can get extra protein through food. So look at that as a first option first. If you do want to use the powder and you decide this is something that you really want to consider, you need to check that the powder is third-party tested through those organizations that we looked at beforehand. It has not been mixed with anything else, and it's also in its original container, that it hasn't come from somewhere else, and it actually is what is actually on the container. All right, but do know you are putting yourself at risk here. And remember, again, you're accountable for everything that you put in your body.
Thank you, Jenny. Moving on to our second scenario, let's imagine the next situation. Here, your coach takes you to a juice bar or probably a cafe and advises you a fruit protein smoothie using the store's personal protein powder. Here, what do you do in this situation, Jenny?
Right. Well, the first thing is don't drink it. All right. I mean, it sounds really, really fussy, but it's really important. Commercial stores don't understand the concerns and the risks for athletes who are under the WADA anti-doping code, and they may not even have heard of WADA or know what you're talking about. So they're likely not to understand the concerns and risks around the presence of banned substances. And those store-based products will have not gone through the same level of care and testing that your third-party batch-tested products would have done. So please, thank the coach, but don't drink it.
Thank you. And finally, our third case study. Your manager has purchased some cereal bars that claim to be high protein for recovery. Should you eat them, yes or no, or why not, or why yes?
Yeah, this is another really common scenario that happens. People run out of things and you go to another country and things look really good, and sometimes you're not even understanding the labels. But most countries have food regulations that cover the safety of food. And as a food, it should be very low risk, but you still need to check the label. If on the label it says it's a dietary supplement, then you need to be really careful, because it's actually no longer then under the food regulations that you would have been protected. So you need to check the ingredients. It's unlikely that it will actually, it's unlikely that it will be risk-free if it's actually a dietary supplement. And then what you need to do is make sure that's got any third-party testing. And then you might have to thank the manager and say, no, thank you. But it's a lesson for managers then too, to actually often be careful, because they're actually trying to do the right thing, but they too sometimes don't understand the WADA anti-doping code and the risk in food. But if in doubt, don't eat it.
Absolutely. And thank you, Jenny, for walking us through these different case studies. It was really helpful, and I hope everyone can put all of this in practice soon. Before we go to our final section of the webinar, we have collated resources for you in case you want to know more about this topic. And finally, well, I see that we have already a couple of answers and questions as well. So let's move to question number 1. And thanks for that. So the first question is, what about sodium bicarbonate?
Right, that's a supplement I do know a lot about, actually. It's been around for a very, very long time. It's one of the ones that you must get professional advice on how to use, because if you take the dose in the wrong level and the wrong amount, you can actually make yourself very ill. Instead of having a benefit to performance, it may actually in some cases cause enough nausea and even diarrhea for an athlete not to be able to compete. So what it is a buffer that buffers hydrogen ions and makes you be able to go at high intensity for a little bit longer, and it buffers lactate a little bit. So it has a performance effect, But again, it's not an everyday supplement. It's a special needs supplement for specific events, and it's again not suitable for all sports.
All right, thank you, Jenny. Here's another one that we have received from Anti-Doping Singapore. What if an athlete advertises a non-batch tested supplement to other athletes? What can NADOS do to caution them about the risk?
Yeah, that's really tricky. A lot of athletes particularly who are endorsing products or promoting products for financial gain, because that's how they make a living, is really difficult. My advice would be to take the athlete aside, have a conversation with them, help them to understand some of the issues, and then help them to find alternatives to actually supplement that income. If they're just being an ambassador, which a lot of companies are using athletes for these days, I would suggest that you actually sit down and go through the anti-doping education process with them on supplements and make sure they understand the importance of third-party batch testing for low risk supplement use, and make them realize that they are also putting other athletes at risk if the supplement happened to be contaminated.
Thank you, Jenny. We have another question from them. What's the role of NMM in improving sports performance?
Now I'm not familiar with that one. Say that one again.
The role of NMN in improving sports performance.
NMN. Can they give us a little bit more information on that one?
Absolutely. I guess for our colleagues from Anti-Doping Singapore, if you would like us, please share with us some more context about your question, and we'll be happy to answer this in just a couple of minutes. So moving on, we have another question from Toby. Similarly, what are your thoughts surrounding compounding of pharmaceuticals? They are similarly not the subject of strict regulatory or quality controls.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've always been a little bit anxious about pharmaceuticals because I often feel that they're at greater risk because they're more likely to have the presence of banned substances in their environment. So I would be encouraging pharmaceutical testing supplements to be actually checked with third-party testing, the same as any other supplement. And we're also finding some medications that are actually containing banned substances for athletes as well that weren't supposed to be in there as well. So we really need to make sure that all these companies have got good manufacturing practices and good clean practices in their factories. There have been some incidences where even the doses of nutrients haven't been at the correct level. So we need to tighten some of those things up for the athletes.
Thank you, Jenny. Our next question is from Ana Paula. In Brazil, athletes often use supplements that are produced in compounding pharmacies, prescribed by a nutritionist on an individual basis. These pharmacies do not have the same rules and oversight as pharmaceutical pharmacies. Is this also a problem in other countries?
I'm not aware of it to the same extent. In most countries, there are rules about who can manufacture and produce things from a food safety point of view and a hygiene safety point of view. Supplement regulations are a little bit grey in some countries, and so that they are able to manufacture and produce things. But if you're not sure about the safety of your products that are actually your athletes are using, please discourage them from taking them. And actually have a conversation with the pharmaceutical companies, because they may not be aware as well. And if they're not interested in helping the athlete and keeping the athlete safe, I don't think you should be working with them.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jenny. Our next question is from Annette Daniela. What supplements would you recommend for boxing or combat sports?
Right. Well, boxing and combat sports often have weight categories. All right. So in those sorts of situations, it's always very individual. Supplements should always be after a nutritional assessment, knowing what we talked about before, the periodization, the customization, and the individualization, taking all those factors into account. So no two people should ever probably have the same. So it shouldn't be repeated. It should be very specific. But if an athlete is cutting weight, I would generally recommend things like a multivitamin to make sure that they are getting enough of the core nutrients, and also making sure that they are getting hydrated and using some electrolyte drinks and things for the high levels of training that they're doing. More than that, I wouldn't recommend anything unless I knew the athlete really well. I think in some cases, creatine might have a role in terms of high intensity repeated exercise, but there isn't any really good evidence as yet. That's just a feeling that it may be useful.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Our next question is from Oliver. What if a farmer supplements their cattle, maybe even with steroids, as often seen in the US? Can it be problematic for an athlete to eat the meat from these cows?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and this has actually happened. So this isn't a surprise as well. There have been some countries in the past, about 10, 15 years ago, where athletes tested positive for growth hormones, and it was traced back to the meat. Now, what we have asked athletes to do when they have are concerned about this is to make sure that when they go to a hotel that they ask that the meat has been government certified to make sure it doesn't contain growth hormones. This practice is on its way out. There's a lot of countries now that are not doing it, but it has been an issue in the past. It's interesting because it's not actually destroyed by the cooking process. So, but you have to eat a decent amount of meat, but it still won't let you off an anti-doping violation should you test positive.
Thank you, Jenny. Going to the next one, is there a difference in outcome of the ban of a positive test when taking a batch testing product versus a non-test product?
Okay, I often talk to athletes about this. I insist that all the athletes I work with keep really good records, because if you can show that you did everything that you possibly could to check it was safe, so you got professional advice, you checked with the company, you checked the batch number, you checked it was third-party tested, and if for some peculiar reason, after going through all that, you tested positive, the companies also have the product available that you can actually go back and retest, and you can send it off, your product off, to be tested to see if it does contain a banned substance. So keep good records, keep some product left over, and before you don't get rid of it all until you get onto the next batch, and you may get a reduced sentence depending on the severity and the level of the dose. All right, it's highly unlikely if you've done a batch tested product that is actually the case. There could be what I call secondary contamination, where something else has got into it, but they will know because they will have the batches. Yeah.
Thank you, Jenny. Our next question from Eric. Are anti-doping rules the same all over the world?
Oh, absolutely. Yep. WADA is the World Anti-Doping Agency. So yes, it covers everyone. Yep.
Absolutely, yes. Here I said that, yes, the World Anti-Doping Code provides the framework for anti-doping policies, rules, and regulations across sports and countries. So all organizations that are signatories to the code, such as NADOS, IFs, and MEOs, should follow this. We have another one from Annette. What are your thoughts about caffeine?
Oh, yes. Caffeine's interesting. Again, it is the most well-researched supplement in sport. And the next one, as I mentioned earlier, is caffeine. Is creatine. So I have real concerns with young people using caffeine, and not everybody responds to caffeine as well. The doses have actually reduced significantly over time. They're now 1 to 3 milligrams per kg of body weight, but we all react differently based on our genetics. So some people are fast responders and some people are slow responders. So you really need to test the use of caffeine. What it does is it makes you perceive the exercise as easier, and you can actually go longer and a little bit harder as a result. And there's about a 3% performance benefit in endurance sports that have actually been consistently shown with caffeine. You can't use coffee the same because you can't get the same actual dose. And you need to remember that the half-life of caffeine is about 4 hours. So you need to be really careful in competitions if you're taking multiple doses, because you can actually end up with significant amounts of caffeine in the bloodstream. And some people have an adverse reaction to caffeine. So they can have very fast heartbeats, they can get nervous, they can get overstimulated. So that might not be an advantage in a sport where you need to be very precise.
Thank you, Jenny. And before we go to the next one, I have a question on my own. What are some of the red flags athletes should look for when looking at the supplement label? Anything special? Any advice?
Yeah, anything you don't recognize. And if it sounds too good to be true, it's probably actually not doing what it says on the label. I really like the examples that you put up earlier, because they actually used very clever marketing language to actually entice people in, and use some very clever and creative interpretations of science on some of those labels. So it's tricky to keep up to date with all the various compounds, but if it's got too many ingredients in it that you don't recognize, or massive doses of things like the 3,000 milligrams that was on one of them, then actually you need to be very, very careful.
Thank you, Jenny. Also, we usually get this question: are there any supplements that are endorsed? For example, we have seen some labels certified by WADA, certified by this ADO. Is this actually true?
No, WADA does not sponsor or certify any products, and neither does the IOC. And I don't know of any NADOs that do either. So
Correct.
it's not their role.
Absolutely. And then going back to the question from our friends from Anti-Doping Singapore, NMN refers to nicotinamide mononucleotide. Anything
Right.
that you
Okay.
would like
Yes.
to add there,
Yeah.
Jenny?
Yeah. So this is one that's actually increasing in use. My concern with it is that it's very easy to get some very high doses, and there isn't enough conclusive evidence that it actually has a performance benefit. A lot of the B vitamin derivative compounds actually are not as water soluble and you can get tingling in your fingers and your feet and nerve damage. So we wouldn't encourage those unless it was on very close supervision.
Thank you, Jenny. And moving to our final question from Nikita. I'm looking to optimize my performance as a competitive international practical shooting confederation athlete. Could you recommend evidence-based supplements that will best support the physical and especially mental demands of this sport?
Right. So fortunately, I've had a bit to do with different types of shooting. So one of the things here is to make sure that you're well hydrated, all right? And also, because you normally have to wear very tight leathers and stuff, that you keep yourself cool, and you have regular feeding to maintain a stable blood glucose levels. I wouldn't recommend caffeine because it's a stimulant and it raises your heart rate. So this is a classic sport where actually supplements probably would do more harm than actually would do any good.
Thank you, Jenny. I believe we have time for one more from Mehdi. As a doctor for a national motorsport federation, if a driver has to lose a few kilograms in a very short day, otherwise he will be at disadvantage. In this case, what nutrition advice can be given to this type of drivers?
Right. So quite often, and again, I've worked in Formula One and motor racing, so I kind of understand this question where weight is actually critical. So what we can do is we can put people on what we call a low residue diet, which removes the bulk from the digestive system, and you can still get enough energy in for the driver while they're riding, because that's quite important, and to maintain their blood glucose and their concentration. And then it's just asking them to monitor their fluids a little bit and just be careful, because they get weighed after the race as well. So they have to maintain that. And they normally are lighter, and not to drink anything until they've been weighed post-racing. So you'd need a clinical dietitian to help you with a low residue diet, because you only do it for a couple of days.
Thank you, Jenny. One more from Angelo. On competition days, I don't have much of an appetite. I want to use an appetite stimulant, but scared that there might be prohibited substance there. I think this is a great question. Any thoughts on that, Jenny?
Right. This is quite a common problem, and it's more common than what a lot of people realize. I would suggest actually talking to a sports psychologist to get some breathing exercises, because what you've got is an overactive gut-brain axis, and you're getting too many messages. And so what you've got is a severe case of gastric disturbance. So I would suggest fluids, things that are easy to get down and small and often. So go with things like banana and yogurt and flavored milk and plain rice and plain pasta, and actually break it up into small 5, 6, 7 feedings during the day rather than trying to have one big meal. White bread, jam sandwiches, honey sandwiches, these are all good, because on the day of competition, you don't have to be perfect with your nutrition. What you have to do is be hydrated and fueled, because those are your priorities.
Thank you, Jenny, for all the great answers, and of you all for the great questions. A big thank you again, Jenny, for your time and for your expertise. Before we wrap up, you can already sign up for our May webinar, which is going to cover another important topic for athletes, which is nutrition. You can register now by scanning the QR code on your screen, and I will pause for a moment so you have time to take a screenshot or scan it. And that brings us to the end of today's webinar. Again, a big thank you to Jenny, and of course to all of you for being with us here today. It's a good afternoon from us here in Switzerland. Take care, and we will see you again soon. Have a great rest of the week. Thank you, Jenny.